Welcome back to the Global News Briefing for Monday, April 13, 2026. Today we cover the fall of Viktor Orbán in Hungary, Pope Leo XIV's landmark African tour, election updates from Peru and Benin, Cyclone Vaianu battering New Zealand. But first, the US naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. US-Iran talks collapse. A naval blockade takes effect. Oil tops $100 a barrel. After the failure of talks in Pakistan on Sunday, President Donald Trump announced via the Truth Social that the US Navy would blockade any ships trying to enter or leave the Strait of Hormuz. The US Military Central Command later said the blockade would only apply to the ships going to or from Iran, including all Iranian ports on the Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Central Command also clarified that US forces would not target any freedom of navigation for vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz to and from non-Iranian ports, and additional information would be provided. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Navy warned that any military vessel approaching would constitute a ceasefire violation and meet a severe response. It also stated that the strait remains open for the innocent passage of civilian ships, provided they follow Iranian regulations. It is noteworthy that there have been reports that Iran is charging up to $2 million for safe passage to the strait. It comes after Iranian parliament passed a bill in late March to legalize a tolling framework. The UK has notably confirmed that it would not participate in the blockade and is instead working with France to form a peaceful multinational mission to protect freedom of navigation. Since Trump's blockade announcement, Brent crude, the global oil benchmark, rose 7% to $102 a barrel, which, when put together, constitutes a rise of 40% since the start of the war. Experts warn that the global economy now faces the prospect of a supply-driven inflation spiral. A supply-driven inflation spiral is a supply-side shock that central banks typically struggle to combat with traditional interest rate hikes, as the measures affect demand rather supply bottlenecks. In other news from around the world, after 16 years, Orbán falls. Hungary turns westward. In a result that reverberated across Europe, Viktor Orbán conceded defeat on Sunday following a landslide victory for opposition leader Péter Magyar and his center-right Tisza party. With 97% of vote counted, Tisza secured 138 of 199 parliamentary seats, which is a two-thirds supermajority on 53.6% of the vote against Orbán Fidesz at 37.8%. Turnout reached a record 79%. Orbán, a close ally of both Trump and Putin, called the result painful but clear. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen welcomed the result, declaring Europe's heart is beating stronger in Hungary tonight. The win signals a potential reversal of Hungary's decade-long drift from EU norms and democratic institutions. The new premier has declared his willingness to curb corruption, restore checks and balances, and amend the constitution. The defeat of Orbán is being viewed as a significant setback for the global far-right movement, particularly for figures like Donald Trump, who had endorsed Orbán as a shining example of conservative politics. Keiko Fujimori leads Peru's first round, but chaos delays the count. Peru's first-round presidential election on Sunday produced a fragmented result and logistical failures that forced electoral authorities to extend voting until Monday in Lima. With 35 candidates on the ballot, right-wing candidate Keiko Fujimori, daughter of former President Alberto Fujimori, led with approximately 16.5% of the vote, her fourth consecutive runoff appearance. Her opponent remains undetermined, with 4 candidates locked in a statistical tie for second place. In the past decade, Peru elected 9 presidents, with only one competing a full term. The last Peruvian president to be removed from office was José Zeri in February this year. He was removed by Congress after just 4 months, becoming the third consecutive president to be ousted, following allegations of corruption involving undisclosed meetings with a Chinese businessman. Rising crime rates and chronic political instability were the dominant voter concerns. Pope Leo XIV begins an 18,000-kilometer African tour. Pope Leo XIV has departed for a 4-nation, 11-day tour of Africa, his third overseas trip since his election, visiting Algeria, Cameroon, Angola, and Equatorial Guinea. He is scheduled to deliver 11 speeches and preside over 7 masses before returning on April 23rd. The visit carries significant historical weight. Leo will become the first pontiff to visit Algeria, a Muslim-majority nation where Islam is the state religion. He is expected to meet President Tebboune, visit the Great Mosque of Algiers, and pay tribute to migrants who have died crossing the Mediterranean. In Cameroon, the Pope's agenda will focus on peace and reconciliation in the conflict-affected English-speaking northwest of the country. Cyclone Vaianu hits New Zealand North Island, triggering floods and evacuation. Cyclone Vaianu made landfall on New Zealand's North Island on Sunday, bringing destructive winds, torrential rain, and large coastal swells that triggered flooding, power outages, and hundreds of evacuations across multiple districts. Met Service lifted cyclone-related watches and warnings on Monday as the system moved away, but a heavy rain watch remained in place for northern Taranaki and surrounding regions. Cleanup operations began Monday morning. The cyclone struck as the country continues to assess the economic cost of a series of extreme weather events that have compounded pressure on the nation's insurance sector and rural communities throughout 2026. Lebanese death toll from Israeli strikes surpasses 2,000. Lebanese authorities confirmed Monday that the death toll from Israeli airstrikes has exceeded 2,000 since the escalation began approximately a month ago. Strikes continued to target southern Beirut while Israel and Hezbollah exchanged fire across northern border. On Sunday, an Israeli drone struck Lebanese Red Cross vehicles in Tyre, drawing international condemnation. Lebanese Prime Minister, speaking on Orthodox Easter, called for unity and stability. Israel and Lebanese officials are separately expected to meet in Washington this Tuesday for ceasefire talks, even as conditions on the ground remain volatile. Hezbollah, in a rare NPR interview, said its command structure remains intact and rocket launches into northern Israel will continue. In Nigeria, an airstrike by the military Yobe state has reportedly killed more than 100 people after jets bombed a crowded market in Jilli village, according to Amnesty International. Witnesses said multiple aircraft struck the area while local hospitals received dozens of severely injured victims, including children, raising fears of major civilian casualty incident in the conflict-hit region. The Nigeria military said that the attack targeted a terrorist enclave linked to Boko Haram, describing it as a precision, intelligence-driven operation near an abandoned settlement. The sharply conflicting accounts have intensified scrutiny over the strike, with growing concerns about the possible misidentification of the target and the protection of civilians in ongoing counter-insurgency operation. The Nigerian Air Force has launched an investigation, but rights groups demands independent accountability as the decade-long insurgency continues, displacing millions across northeastern Nigeria. We end in Africa today, where Benin has a new president. Finance Minister Romuald Wadagni was elected as expected after a campaign that was marred by the main opposition party being barred from running in the presidential election. The election faced voter apathy visible by the low turnout. President Vodagny inherits a poverty-ridden, unequal economy, a polarized political landscape following a failed coup attempt in December 2025, and a rising Al-Qaeda-affiliated insurgency spilling over Burkina Faso and Niger. That's all for today's briefing. This was a Northtown daily production hosted by Maruf Tanvir and written and produced by Maruf Tanvir and Hussein Zuhairi Suhan. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back tomorrow with results from Hungary and the latest on the Middle East. We'll be back with you in 24 hours.